A warning. This podcast contains descriptions of sexual and family violence and self-harm, which some listeners may find disturbing. You can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or the Domestic Violence Hotline 1-800-RESPECT.
Subscribers to Shadow of Doubt get to hear episodes first and get access to all our bonus material. Subscribe at theaustralian.com.au or check out our channel on Apple Podcasts, Crime X Plus.
Hello.
Hey, is this
Who's speaking?
it's Dad?
Good. That's a surprise.
Yeah, I have been wanting to call you for a while, but it's taken a long time. Are you able to talk?
2 years after his daughter Emily was first admitted to a psychiatric ward, Martin Johnson was working overseas when he received a totally unexpected call from Emily's sister, Sarah. It had been more than a year since Sarah abruptly cut off contact with her father after telling him that Emily was alleging he'd sexually abused her when she was young. The last time they'd spoken, Sarah had demanded that he leave her mother and pointedly reminded him of the sexual misconduct allegations he'd faced as a high school teacher in the 1980s. Now, here she was on the phone.
How are you?
Yeah, doing good, but just some stuff's just been going around my head, and I'm going,
Sarah's father doesn't know it, but his daughter is actually sitting in a police station and their conversation is being recorded by a detective. It's what's known as a pretext call, designed to capture a suspect making admissions. And in the course of this call, Martin Johnson does make admissions. I'm Richard Guilliatt, and this is Shadow of Doubt, Episode 5, Listening In. Early in the recorded call, Sarah tells her father that her sister Emily's mental health problems have brought up issues for her, that she believes her sister's accusations against him. Martin Johnson replies that Sarah should know Emily has been making false allegations against him, that she has twice spoken to police about vicious assaults that never actually happened.
Accused me of meeting her in town and bashing her, and, that was just unbelievable. And then the latest one was that I bashed her when Mum was standing watching, at a petrol station. It's hard to support someone that maybe is just not seeing the reality. And
Sarah tells her father she believes Emily because she's witnessed his violence.
and of course I believe her. I do. You always used to get angry at home. You have put your hand on us before, and even worse.
I know that. I've admitted that. I've said I got angry, and I'm the first to admit that, but I didn't do the thing that...
Sorry, how can I not believe her when, as a child, Dad, I saw you drag Mum by the hair down the creek? Like, how can I not believe that then you would do... Tell me what to think here.
I know that, and that's the sort of demons and the problems that I've had to face, is that my behaviour was not always perfect, but I never did any of those things. But Mum and I had issues, but we're still together. We're still dealing with all of this. I just want Mum to be. I want her to allowed to be a mum again, and I've given her the new girls every opportunity. I spend nearly my whole fucking life in this country, which I don't enjoy, but I'm doing it to give everyone a chance to reconnect, and I'm prepared to give away everything to allow your mum to be your mum again.
Sarah moves toward the real purpose of the call. She mentions the way her father would massage her when he coached her in sports.
It happened at home, but the issues that I've had with the massage, and I need to talk to you about that.
Yeah, and I am really sorry, and I cannot say sorry anymore. But
I need you to explain it, because it makes no sense to me.
I don't understand.
I have gone to so many psychologists about it. Okay, and I had experiences with you I shouldn't have had.
Which you never spoke about.
I have spoken to you about it.
Never.
And then...
Yeah, but many years later, a long time later. A long time later, and, you know...
What was I meant to do at the time? I was scared.
Sarah tells her father what she's told police, that she experienced orgasms when he massaged her. He replies that he can't understand how that happened.
I was, Dad, I know what it was now. Like, I was having orgasms with you.
Which is scary, because I just cannot understand that, it just doesn't make sense to me that when someone does something with no intent, okay, and look, you know, and I've gone and spoken to counsellors and psychologists as well. You know, I've gone to get help over this, to just say, how did this happen, and what did I do wrong, and why did I overstep the mark, and I didn't even know it, and that's what's so stupid about this, and that's how no apology will ever be enough for you, probably. But I am apologising, saying I cannot understand it myself, because there was never any intent.
I accept what you're saying, and I appreciate it, but the thing I don't understand is, how am I meant to understand that?
Well, because a lot of the times it's what's going on in your mind. It's this is what I've talked to your strengths about as well, and they've expressed that your reactions, because you misinterpreted or your body misinterpreted what was happening, your reactions then, even though, and it's probably the same as what's been going on in mind, you know, although this business about me going into a room when she was young, I never went near you girls. I didn't have time for you kids.
And that's where this is where I've validated a lot of my stuff, because I have had a lot of those experiences, and of course I support and what she's saying, because I have the same fear.
As the conversation continues, Sarah becomes angrier. She tells her father she remembers his hand inside her. He says he has no memory of that.
You know, I don't even remember that, you know, maybe I've blocked things out.
Dad, you did, and you need to... No, it's not about being sorry. Like, do you know how fucked up this is? Do you?
Martin Johnson again denies ever molesting any of his daughters. But Sarah brings up an incident she says that she witnessed with her sister Rebecca.
What about the time that I walked in and was screaming because you put her hand on your penis? Like, well, how am I meant to think about this? Like,
you weren't in the house when that incident happened.
Are you kidding? I went down and I tried to say to my own mother what was going on, and I've tried so many times to go to Mum and tell her what's happened as well.
Months later, I think, look, I'm not going to take these phone calls. Look, I have hurt like hell. What you have done to your family is unforgivable, and what I did, I'm sorry for, and if you're not going to accept that, you won't get talked to until I'm dead. Okay, I've got to go. I don't need to talk to you.
The conversation has become openly hostile, and Sarah tries repeatedly to extract an admission of guilt from her father.
What are you apologising for?
I'm apologising because I didn't understand, okay? I've learned a lot. I have got help, I've got assistance, I've got closure and all of this. I still can't explain it, I don't, but my intent was never what you're saying. And that's what I'm apologising for, because when people do something unintentionally, sometimes it's misinterpreted.
Sorry, Dad, I'm not understanding. Do what intentionally?
To hurt people, to yell, to come home angry, to just not understand that I was a father. I was a useless father for a long time, I know that.
Sarah mentions her sister Emily's allegations.
I think might be telling the truth about some of her accusations. I believe her.
There might be elements of truth, okay? There might be elements of truth. But this story about the footsteps coming down the hallway, you know, I never went. You know I never went in your rooms. Never. Yeah, it just didn't happen. I never touched inappropriately.
Martin Johnson brings up the subject of Bill Newman, the swimming coach who molested Sarah in her teens while he was living with the family. But Sarah dismisses that and steers the conversation back to its purpose.
I want you to explain why you touched me the way you touched me, and that is all. That is what I want from you.
because I don't know. I've talked to so many different people about this to get closure myself on this. And I can't understand it. And maybe I was having issues in my head, in my subconscious. I don't know. I cannot even remember a lot of those situations.
I know, and I know that, Dad. I know that you didn't mean to hurt us, but the fact is that you did, and I think you might be sick, and I think that, I don't want to accept that my dad did this, but he did, and
yeah, okay, I agree that back then I think there might have been something in my head that was sick. I agree, 100%. I don't disagree with you. I think I had an issue. I had a problem. I don't understand it. I can't understand it now, but I don't have a problem now.
In court several years later, this phone call would be used against Martin Johnson. Although he repeatedly denies ever molesting any of his daughters, there is a lot that he does admit to. He refers to his own mental sickness and his demons. He doesn't deny that he dragged his wife by her hair to the creek, and he acknowledges violence towards his children. At one point, he talks about caning Sarah's leg with a broom handle and throwing Emily into a bush. He acknowledges there could be some truth to Emily's allegations and that there had been an incident when he massaged Rebecca, which is something I'll get into more fully later in the podcast. When I questioned him about all this, Johnson offered his own explanations. He said that at the time of this conversation, he hadn't spoken to Sarah for a year, and he wanted to repair his shattered family. So he avoided arguing about the creek incident, even though he and his wife deny it ever happened. He says the demons he spoke about were his anger and his controlling ways, and that he had no idea that Sarah and Emily were telling police he had sexually abused them for years. He knew only that his sports massages seemed to be a pivotal issue for both of them, and that Emily had made some sort of allegation about him coming into her bedroom when she was young.
With that phone call, and I was thinking, well, look, if there really was an issue, if is so anxious about this massage, well, perhaps there is some truth to it. Like, I didn't intentionally do it, but then, even though I may not have intentionally done it, and I had no sexual interest in my daughters whatsoever. That just did not exist. However, if I was inadvertently massaging and there was some, it was arousing some feelings in the girls, then I was guilty. I accept that. I'd done the wrong thing. And that's where this phone call was such a setup.
By the time of this call, police had already been monitoring the Johnson family's phones for 2 weeks. So when Martin Johnson telephoned his wife 2 days later, they were being recorded.
hello.
Hello, it's me.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, yeah, not bad. Yeah, guess who called me?
Who? Are you serious?
Yeah, a couple of nights ago.
Johnson gives his wife a potted summary of the call from Sarah. He comments on Sarah's ambiguous support for her sister, that there might be truth to some of Emily's accusations.
Oh, it's just funny. She was sort of, she's just saying she needs to move on and closure and all that sort of shit, and she still can't understand a lot of the stuff that happened, and yeah, she's still blaming me 100%. That's the thing,
Why would she ring you?
Just to talk to me, about all the fact that she says I've completely screwed up her life and all that sort of shit. But I listened to her, I made her talk.
He mentions that they discussed Bill Newman and that Sarah had dismissed what happened with Newman as irrelevant.
She doesn't see him as being responsible for anything. So she's still living very much in a dream world, but I think has an issue with that whole stuff. She's saying, she's sort of half, she kept calling me dad and everything.
Oh, really?
It's fine, but very strange. Yeah, but I think, and she broke down, she was crying at the end of the call.
Oh my
a little
God.
bit, which was probably good.
What about you? How do you feel?
I just need to move on. Oh, pretty shattered.
Well, what does moving on mean, though?
I don't know. But she's just saying that she just needs to, basically closure on the whole. Oh, she just kept on about the massage stuff.
They talk about the incident that happened when he once massaged Rebecca and whether Sarah was even there at the time.
I think she's confused because she said that she walked in to the room. And I said, well, that's impossible. You weren't even in. I don't even think you were around. You weren't around. And then she said that all the massage was done. I would never do it in public. It was always done in a closed room, and I would always take it into another room and close the door. And that never happened, did it?
No, she obviously...
It was always in the lounge room.
Yeah, always, yeah.
It's just basically, she just said a few things that was very, hard to hear, but...
Yeah.
I said, but if that's how you feel, then I'm really sorry that that's how you feel, and obviously I am guilty of something, of making you feel like that. So I said, please, just time to move on. She just wants to hear me say that, I did something wrong. And now I told her, look, if that's how you feel, then, I'm guilty of making you feel like that. And I just said to her, why didn't you tell me? I said, because so much of the massage I then did with was based on the fact that, of her responses, and that she wasn't honest to me. She wasn't truthful.
Listening back to this 6-minute call, I was struck by the fact that Martin Johnson never tells his wife the single most important and distressing thing about his conversation with their daughter, that Sarah had directly accused him of sexual assault when he massaged her, that she'd said the massages aroused her and left her feeling afraid. Instead, he puts the best possible spin on the call.
And she actually was very appreciative of the fact that I have left her alone and I haven't pursued her.
Yeah.
And I did talk about those two situations when accused you and me of bashing her and all that sort of stuff that went to court. And I said, you realise that this was a story that made up. She's very good at these stories. She takes little bits of truth and she exaggerates it. And I said, she is sick, getting treatment, and I'm going to get cut off, so there you go.
As their conversation winds down, the Johnsons give no sign that they have any idea of what's really going on, that their daughters have made grave allegations of sexual abuse to police, and that Sarah might have had other reasons for calling. Susan Johnson is still pondering out loud why Emily has cut off contact and what it all has to do with the sports massages.
Do you think it's got something to do with moving away, or...?
I think so, yeah. I don't know.
By the end of the call, she's speculating that Sarah's sudden reappearance in their lives could offer hope to the family.
Can you call me tonight, please?
I'll try, yeah.
Yeah, please do.
So everything's fine, don't worry, right?
No, I see it as positive, like...
In fact, nothing could have been further from the truth. The Johnsons' phones were being tapped because they were now the subject of a major police strike force investigation. It was being led by Reese Thompson, the 34-year-old detective who had interviewed Emily Johnson 4 months earlier after she accused her parents of trying to kidnap her outside a petrol station. In the months since then, Emily had been visiting Detective Thompson with her counsellor, Donna, and recounting in harrowing detail her memories of being sexually abused by her parents throughout her childhood. The 78-page statement that Detective Thompson compiled from these interviews is one of the most shocking testimonies ever produced in an Australian sexual assault case. Emily described her father violently raping her in her own bed from when she was 5. She said he had dragged her to the shed as a 6-year-old, forced her to perform oral sex, tied her up with rope, and left her there for 3 nights without food. The statement went on to describe more than 50 degrading sexual assaults up to her 18th birthday. Incidents so repulsive and violent that it's not possible for the details to be shared in this podcast. The father she described could only have been a sadistic psychopath who relished her suffering. Between her 5th and 10th birthdays, she remembered being raped 8 times, sexually assaulted with a blunt tool and scissors, beaten and forced to eat chilies. In the years that followed, she recalled her father violating her with a spanner, a handsaw and a screwdriver, striking her across the head with a metal tool, terrorising her with a chainsaw and a machete, pinning her down over an ant's nest, and sexually assaulting her on dozens of occasions, often in the shed. She also accused her mother of sexually assaulting her and aiding the abuse by training her to sexually please her father. Nearly all of this extraordinary violence was said to have taken place in the secluded home she shared with her sisters and brother. But Emily had given police more than just a statement. She'd handed Detective Thompson a diary which she said she'd kept when she was 14. It was filled with entries about her nights in the shed and the violent assaults that left her bleeding. Its pages were littered with anguished messages scrawled in capital letters. Get tough. You're weak. No crying. Most remarkably, there was one entry which mentioned that Emily had buried some of the tools that her father had tortured her with. Why had it taken Emily nearly a year to mention to police that she'd buried her father's torture implements on the family property when she was in her early teens? Had she only just remembered this in therapy? Her treatment records don't shed any light on that, but Emily herself understood the significance of all this to police. Her grandmother told me that one day Emily had called her and told her that there'd been a development that would change the case, that she had buried something in the garden that wouldn't have rotted away. The Johnsons would begin learning about this a week after Sarah called her father, when Susan Johnson arrived home from her morning run to find several police cars and a forensic truck parked outside the house. In episode 1, we described how police had arrived earlier that morning with Emily and her counsellor, Donna, to help find the buried tools and the girl's underwear hidden in the shed. When Susan Johnson saw Detective Thompson walking towards her outside her home, she blurted out her most immediate fear. Has something happened to Emily?
I thought they were coming to tell me that my daughter had killed herself. And that was my greatest fear through all this, my whole driving force to stop that happening. And she looked at me dumbfounded, as if to say, like almost sarcastically, like, are you for real?
As Emily's mother took in the sight of 11 police officers milling around her home, Detective Thompson showed her the search warrant and explained why they were there.
She sort of came very close to me and she said to me, we found items. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, we found underwear. And I'm just looking at her thinking, what? And then tools. She goes, well, you don't probably know, we don't believe you know the full extent of it, but you do know something. And I just said, I have no idea what you're talking about.
The Johnsons' daughter, Rebecca, remembers an identical confrontation when Detective Thompson met her in the driveway and told her that tools had been found on the property.
I said, like, what? And they're like, what do you actually mean? And I remember her face, she comes up to me and she goes, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You need to come see me in my office. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I do not know what you're talking about. She goes, you know.
Just how shocked the Johnsons were during these events can be heard on the police telephone intercepts, because Susan Johnson was being recorded when she phoned her husband overseas as the raid was happening. I've listened to that recording and heard the panicked and shaky tone in her voice as police can be heard in the background making their way through the house. At one point, Martin Johnson says, "It's all lies."
Yeah, but this is ridiculous.
I know it is. It doesn't matter. This is serious and it's going to come to a head.
It's just all lies.
But that's the only part of that entire conversation I can play you. In fact, it's one of the few excerpts I can play you from the hundreds of hours of recordings the police made while they listened in on the Johnsons for 5 weeks, both before the raid and afterwards. I can't even describe to you what's on those tapes, even though I've listened to all of them, because only a tiny segment of them was ever played to the jury in the Johnsons' trial. But although I can't tell you what's on them, I can tell you what's not on them. What's not on them is any admission of guilt by either Martin or Susan Johnson about the allegations their daughters have made. There is no moment that suggests they're talking in code about crimes they've committed against Emily and Sarah. Martin Johnson never admits any sexual misconduct, and his wife never presses him to confess or mentions any suspicions that she may have harboured over the years. Did the Johnsons know that their phones were being bugged? At some point after the raid, it's clear that they began to suspect as much. But on many of these recordings, they sound perplexed. And after the raid, both Susan Johnson and her daughter Rebecca sent Facebook messages to Emily, expressing their shock and bewilderment. Here's the text of Susan's message, read by an actor.
Emily, why have you not come to me and told me these terrible things have happened? And worse, the detective believes that I was aware of it all along. I always did everything as a mother to protect and always be there for you. If I failed and something happened, then I was never aware of it. I believe you that something has happened, but can never and will never understand why you've taken this approach. Obviously something has happened, but you are killing the people who have loved you so much over the years, and you are killing that love.
To police, the raid provided compelling evidence. Emily had drawn diagrams of the tools that she said she'd buried on the property nearly 6 years earlier, and they'd found them just where she said they would. She told them she had buried underwear on the property, and they had found a pair of girls' underpants in the shed. Inside the shed, they had found words scratched into the woodwork in childlike capital letters: Bad Dad, More We, and Trapped, spelt with only one P. Yet Emily's statement also raised some obvious questions. How had she excelled in high-performance sport for so many years while suffering such extraordinary violence? Why did her childhood medical records show no injuries or infection consistent with the brutality that she described? How could her father have raped her repeatedly in her bedroom at night without anyone in the family noticing? And how did she manage to hide all of this while attending school, going out with boys, and training on the sports field 6 days a week, dressed only in athletic gear? Not only had scores of teenagers stayed at the family property overnight, but boarders had sometimes lived with them for months at a time. I tracked down 2 of them to see if they remembered any sign of the monstrous behaviour that Emily described. Here's Michael, that's not his real name, who trained with Martin Johnson and lived with the family for roughly 8 months while being homeschooled by Susan Johnson when he was 15.
I would say they lived like a very normal family, but they were just very athletic, you know. There was nothing that I would say was untoward or would deem suspicious behaviour in my eyes. I wouldn't say I saw anything that led me to feel uncomfortable or was out of line behaviour, yeah.
In the year Michael lived with the family, Emily alleged that her father had raped her with tools on multiple occasions in the shed, causing terrible sexual injuries that left her hemorrhaging blood. She said he had bashed her over the head with a metal object, and she remembered that her mother sexually assaulted her in a drunken stupor one night. But Michael saw no sign of any of it. He remembers Emily's mother as a loving and protective woman, and he didn't notice any friction or hostility between Emily and her father, who was often absent overseas.
I thought they got on. Yeah, I really did. I couldn't see anything, that would lead me to think otherwise. But yeah, from observation, I wouldn't say they had disagreements or, I've never seen abuse in the sense that I never saw someone get hit or I never saw, that type of behaviour displayed from the father.
Then there's Peter, who we heard from in episode 1. He also trained with Martin Johnson for several years, and he lived with the family for 6 months when they rented a home closer to the girls' high school. He went on to teach the sisters, and his memories of Emily are completely at odds with the life of pain and misery that she described to police.
She was just, like I say, a ball of energy, bubbly. She was super successful, super popular, doing really well at everything she would turn her hand to, other than maths. She was, just loving life. It was just success after success, and without really trying almost, like it was just natural. Obviously did work hard, but it looked natural. Yeah, it blows my mind, and like I was close enough that I would have hoped she would have said something. And actually all three of them were strong enough individuals that one of them would have said something if they'd known of anything going on like this. So, because I was like that big brother.
Emily also had boyfriends like Alex, who was part of the sports squad and dated her for a year when he was 15. He recalls no sign of any violence, nor any indication that she was afraid of her father.
I didn't hear anything about it from her, if that was the case or anything like that. But again, I know that's probably a traumatic thing too to bring up to someone if that was the case. Yeah, it's kind of hard to process because, you know, we spent so much time with them, and the behaviour and actions probably don't, align.
Many of Emily's friends, male and female, recall her as a confident teenager with a relaxed attitude to sexual matters. The sports squad was a close-knit group in which intimacies were shared and there were few secrets. Here's Tanya, another of her friends from Martin Johnson's squad.
We were very open. So when she's had a boyfriend, she was we're very open with it. I've told her about my stuff, and obviously being a little bit older, she looks to myself and to her sisters. She could have talked to any of us. I mean, we spoke about everything because we were together so often. Yeah, we'd talk about boys and everything, girl products, obviously, going through that time and stuff. We had so many different times, especially away from her father, where she could have said something. Or her sisters, her sisters were so close.
The Johnsons were by no means a conventional family. Some of their neighbours remember them as insular, off in their own corner of the local pub when eating dinner. Sport was everything. The girls' diets were strictly policed, and their home was secluded. Some people who visited the house were taken aback by a framed photo in the living room which showed the girls and their mother sitting on a rock near the creek, naked, with their backs to the camera. It was one of the shots that had been taken for the fundraising calendar, and to Susan Johnson, it portrayed the natural lifestyle that she and her daughters pursued. But not everyone saw it that way.
Yeah, so I remember thinking that the photo was extremely bizarre. I was alarmed when I saw it. To me, it seemed to just that there was no other way of it not being a sexual photo. It's from how I remember it. I didn't think, oh, that's a nice nature shot. I just thought that's a really strange nude family photo in the living room.
That's one of the young athletes who trained with Martin Johnson. She remembers him as a great coach, and she said she never felt uncomfortable with him, but she did find aspects of the family unsettling. She thought Daniel Johnson was terrified of his father, and that Emily was driven too hard, even when she appeared to be cracking under the strain. Emily's boyfriend, Sam, also thought her training regime had a punitive quality, and that her expressions of love for her father sometimes sounded forced.
So, just the way she spoke about him, but spoke about him lovingly, but it was like it was over-exaggerated as in forced. Like she was told that if anyone asks, you have to say, you love me, you think I'm great, you're my coach, obviously, and we have a different relationship to other father-daughter sort of setups.
He seemed to agree with Sarah and Emily that Susan Johnson was a binge drinker. But when I asked, he couldn't remember a specific incident of drunkenness, and neither could any of the 30-odd friends of the family that I interviewed for this podcast. Nearly every one of those people, athletes, their parents, former boyfriends, former friends, gave me the same description of the family, that they seemed close-knit and loving. None of them saw any sign of violence, and nearly all of them had another thing in common. Did the police ever contact you?
No, never. No, never.
Did the police ever contact you?
Nope, not once.
Did the police interview you or approach you in any way?
No, I was never approached at all.
Did the police ever contact you?
Not me, no.
Detective Thompson investigated the Johnsons for 4 months before she raided their home. During that time, police did approach some friends and former athletes from the Johnsons' circle, but the ones I spoke to remember it as an unpleasant experience. Emily Johnson's close friend Kathy, for instance, recalls speaking on the phone to a female detective who began describing some of the allegations. Kathy had known Emily since before they were teenagers. She had stayed at the Johnson home many times, trained with the family 6 days a week, and during one 6-month period, Emily had lived at her home and shared her bedroom to be closer to school. She recalls telling the detective that what Emily was describing simply couldn't be true.
I think just because I spent so much time with the family, not just with, the sister who is making these accusations, but also with the whole family, whether it was at my house, whether it was at school, whether it was at training, down at their property, we spent a lot of time together. So I'm very confident that I was there at those particular times and that it was made up. They asked me if I wanted to support the accusations and I said no.
And so you were trying to convince them, were you, that in your view these things couldn't have happened without you noticing?
Correct.
But they just didn't want to hear that?
At one point, the officer actually laughed at me.
Kathy's mother recalls a similar experience.
I received a phone call from a female officer, can't remember the name of course, asking me questions about the family and basically trying to put words into my mouth and trying to force me to give answers that she wanted me to give. She kept really putting things a certain way that I would answer. But it did happen, are you sure? But this happened, didn't it? And I kept saying, no, absolutely not. It's like she'd made up her own mind.
Police would never find a single witness who could recall any evidence supporting Emily's allegations of extreme sexual violence. Her school records were unremarkable. No physiotherapist, trainer or coach had noticed wounds consistent with the vicious assault she described. Even her sister Sarah had noticed none of it. Sarah's own statement was unusual in itself. She'd told police her father once punched her repeatedly in the face, causing permanent damage to her nose. But that assault was said to have happened in a bathroom at the family home of Emily's friend, Kathy, who totally refutes the story, as does her mother.
Absolutely did not occur. There was an incident where she went into the bathroom, that she misbehaved, and he did go into the bathroom with her. I believe he smacked her with a towel, from what I heard. Didn't come up with any injuries, any marks, but I can believe from what I heard he might have smacked her on the bum with a towel. And she was crying, but there was nothing else that I knew, obviously.
In the week after the raid on their home, the Johnsons spent hours on the phone discussing what had happened and what it all meant. Susan Johnson recalls that during these conversations, her husband kept coming back to the subject of Bill Newman, the swimming coach who had groomed and molested Sarah. Could he have done something to Emily when she was 8 that triggered this whole catastrophe?
Yeah, I think he was raising it with me, saying, don't you think it was, could it have been? I think he was the one pushing the point with me and asking me, because he was saying, well, it wasn't me. I remember, obviously, we were trying to find, as I say, some sort of rationale for this.
Police had started an investigation of Bill Newman after Sarah Johnson made her allegations against him, and Detective Thompson had researched his history of violence and suspected paedophilia. But Newman had died the year before, and those inquiries had nowhere to run. And early in her investigation, Detective Thompson had turned up one valuable witness against Martin Johnson, his elderly mother-in-law, Margaret. In a signed statement, Susan Johnson's mother had corroborated an incident that Sarah had told police about. She said that 7 years earlier, she had heard her granddaughters laughing in an upstairs room at her home, and she'd walked up the stairs to find Martin Johnson naked in bed as Sarah, Rebecca and Emily massaged him. She said her son-in-law was clearly aroused and had looked directly at her as the girls laughed and spoke to her. Sarah's account of this incident had been different. She had said it happened 2 years later, when she was 16, and that her father was covered with a towel. When I met Susan Johnson's mother, I asked her whether the police or Sarah had told her about this alleged incident before she gave her statement. The girl's grandmother swore that that wasn't the case, that she had remembered it spontaneously while talking to Detective Thompson. She said she'd told no one about the incident at the time. Of all the allegations made against Martin Johnson, this would be the only one that involved the three girls together and an eyewitness. Yet Rebecca, who would have been a teenager at the time, emphatically denies it ever happened. When I first read her grandmother's police statement to her, Rebecca sounded shocked.
See, like, that's horrendous. Like, that sounds absolutely, like, repulsive.
Rebecca says it's inconceivable that such an incident would have happened without her or her sisters reporting it to their mother, and she says she's baffled to this day by her grandmother's statement.
I have no idea where that came from. And I most certainly, for the life of me, if I saw my father sitting like that, I wouldn't be sitting there. I'd run away screaming and I'd straight away tell mum or my grandmother. And I most certainly have never ever seen something like that.
But police now had the tools. They had Emily's diary, the sister's statements, and they had information about Martin Johnson's past alleged offending. A week after the raid, Susan Johnson was out running on a road near her home when an unmarked car pulled up and Detective Thompson stepped out.
She flashed her badge and, so I just had that same feeling, that absolute horror. Like, why are you here? And she said, you are under the arrest of sexual assault. And I don't even have the words to describe how I felt at that time or where that was coming from. And I just said to her, what are you talking about? And she said, get in the car. And I said, no, I'm not getting in the car. And so I started getting quite hysterical, saying, you know, what are you doing? What is this about? I said, you have got this so terribly wrong. As a mother, please just listen to me, please. And she just said, if you don't stop, I'm going to handcuff you.
Police allowed Susan Johnson to go home and change before taking her to the police station, where she found out for the first time that her daughters were not just accusing her husband of sexual offences, but her as well. The 8 charges she faced included sexually assaulting her daughter Emily when she was under the age of 10 and indecently dealing with both Emily and her sister Sarah into their teens. This time, she had a solicitor present and refused to answer any questions. Rebecca Johnson remembers getting a call from her mother and going to the police station, where she was taken into a room with a female detective who sat opposite her while a male police officer sat in a corner with his gun cradled in his hand. Even a decade later, the memory still makes her shake.
They didn't go into detail. They just said that your mother is in trouble for some very serious things. And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, you're going to find out. I felt very, very, very intimidated. I'll never forget it, sitting there. And I said, look, I want my mum back. What's going on? I was in tears. And then, mum was released. She was beside herself. And basically from that day, the reality of what had happened, the allegations of shock were basically, that was our life. That was our life. And
just let me just. Are you okay? I can hear you getting upset just even thinking about this.
Oh, I can see it. Oh, it's one of the hardest days of my life. It's when never again I ever spoke to. That's when they said if you call any your auntie or your grandmother, you will be under arrest.
After 8 hours locked in a cell, Susan Johnson was released without bail, clutching the police charge sheet. Back at home an hour later, her husband called from overseas as police listened in. On the recording, she sounds distressed, her voice breaking as she describes what's happened. The conversation lasts for 48 minutes, and the few parts of it we can play you give only a small sense of the family's reaction. Here's Rebecca reading the charge sheet to her father.
I'm just reading the actual full facts of the statements. Offence 7 says and the accused, which is Mum, were at their home, and at this time the complainant is aged 16 years old. It is alleged during this time that one evening the accused had been drinking wine.
I've got to try and sleep.
You've really got to hear this. It is alleged during this time that one evening the accused came to the complainant's bedroom and was having a general conversation about the complainant's father. During this conversation, the accused discussed methods on how to make Dad's penis hard.
That's the only snippet of that entire recording that I can play you, because it's all the jury in the Johnsons' trial was ever told about. Both Susan Johnson and her daughter remember how shocked they were that day as they read for the first time the allegations of abuse that the family was facing.
I just couldn't believe the extent of it all, but I knew it was all rubbish, so I didn't even really read them in detail. I was just so distressed. But I still didn't even read them properly, and to be honest, I haven't still to this day read all of them properly because I just knew they weren't true. It's just so distressing to read, and it's just rubbish. It's just all, untrue.
Even after the raid on his home, Martin Johnson stayed overseas, which only added to police suspicions about him. According to his wife, though, he stayed away on the advice of a solicitor, who told them that if he returned to Australia, he would almost certainly be refused bail, and the couple would lose the financial means to defend themselves. So when Susan Johnson fronted up to the local courthouse to face her charges, she was accompanied only by Rebecca and the solicitor. Rebecca recalls being stunned when the charges were read out, because Emily had told police that there was one occasion when their mother had demonstrated masturbation to the three sisters. It was another incident she denies ever happened. During Susan Johnson's 8 hours in the lockup, police had again assured her that Emily was well. But the week after her mother appeared in court, Emily called one of her counsellors from a cliff top, threatening to jump, and she ended up back in the mental health ward, sedated. Some staff in the hospital found her behaviour incongruous. Catherine, the nurse we heard from previously, had seen Emily in town, socialising happily with friends, which seemed a strange contrast to her self-destructiveness on the ward. Catherine recalls an occasion when she saw Emily chatting to a female colleague. After the conversation ended, the colleague approached Catherine and told her that Emily had just boasted about how much money she was saving being in the mental health ward.
She said to me, "Did you hear what she said? She's actually skiting about saving, I think it was somewhere between $14,000 and $16,000. She said, while I've been here, I've been able to save that much, and I'm going off to Japan soon, and la la la." But it was a really provocative conversation to have with a senior nurse.
In fact, Emily would soon go on a skiing holiday to Japan with her boyfriend and her aunt's family, looking happy and relaxed in a Facebook shot in a restaurant near their ski lodge. She was also suing the masseur who she said had raped her in a hotel room overseas. Her lawyers had filed a statement of claim in the New South Wales District Court. Her account of that incident had changed again. She now said the masseur had removed her pants and underwear while she was asleep and lay on top of her. Her psychiatrist had provided an expert report which stated that her post-traumatic stress disorder had been caused by that rape, making no mention of the serious allegations Emily was pursuing against her parents. But while police were ploughing ahead with their investigation, one local prosecutor was troubled. The handwritten diary that Emily had given to police, which she said she'd written when she was 14, contained multiple entries that didn't make sense. Emily had recorded 6 occasions in 1 month when her father abused her in the shed. But Martin Johnson's immigration records showed he wasn't in the country at that time. One entry described her father searching for the tools that she'd buried, but it was written on a weekend when they were both more than 2,000 kilometres away from home at an interstate race. Other entries referred to race meetings on dates that were wrong by up to 2 months. And a forensic document expert had examined the diary and concluded that entries that were spaced up to a week apart had actually been written at the same time. The DPP solicitor emailed Susan Johnson's lawyer acknowledging that aspects of the case were problematic. She sent a report to her superiors in Sydney requesting a review. But within a few weeks, a dramatic development would change everything. Because 7 months after she'd arrested Susan Johnson, Detective Thompson telephoned Emily's sexual assault counsellor and told her that Emily was coming in to see her. She said Emily was having new memories and she had new details to report. It was the start of a chain of events that would end with the arrest of Emily's sister Rebecca and the jailing of Susan Johnson.
It was the most terrifying experience. And I was just put in a cell on my own and had no idea sort of what was happening, had no phone calls. I didn't eat for 2 days. I was just so disturbed because I'd done all the right things and here I was in this position again. I just thought there was an ulterior, something else going on. Like I felt there was something else happening to make sure, that trying to break me or trying to get me to speak or just pushing me to an absolute point of breaking, and well, they nearly did.
Shadow of Doubt is a podcast investigation from The Australian. It's written and presented by Richard Guilliatt and produced and mixed by our multimedia editor, Lia Tsamoglou. I'm Editorial Director Claire Harvey, host of our daily news podcast, The Front, where you'll hear our journalists talking candidly about their stories. You can listen to The Front on your smart speaker every morning. Just say, play the news from The Australian to hear the latest episode. Subscribe to our channel CrimeX Plus on Apple Podcasts or search The Australian wherever you get your podcasts. And you can check out all our journalism anytime at theaustralian.com.au.
In the next episode of Shadow of Doubt,
I'd rung the doctor. She was the supervising doctor to the doctor that actually conducted this examination. And she was astounded as to the conclusions that had been recorded in the report. The conclusions were not capable of being drawn.